The sky over Seattle was a dull silver the morning Lena Caldwell walked into the offices of Langford and Pierce, the law firm that had handled her family's affairs for decades. The glass walls and polished walnut decor echoed with a cold kind of authority. Fitting, she thought, for the kind of legacy her parents had left behind. She sat alone at one end of the long conference table, her hands resting stiffly on a leather folder containing nothing more than old family photos and her mother's obituary. A few minutes later, the double doors swung open with the practiced confidence of someone used to winning. Ethan Caldwell, her older brother and the golden boy of Caldwell Technologies, entered in a custom-tailored suit and expensive arrogance. He offered her a nod that bordered on smirk before settling into the chair across from her, flanked by two attorneys. Mr. Langford, their longtime estate lawyer, cleared his throat and adjusted his bifocals. "Thank you both for coming. Let's proceed." The will reading was swift and brutal. Gregory Caldwell, their father and presumed dead founder of the tech empire, had left everything, every estate, stock share, offshore holding, and intellectual property, to Ethan. Mr. Langford's voice barely wavered as he listed them. The oceanfront mansion in Sausalito, the controlling shares in Caldwell Technologies, multiple tech patents, and a trust fund large enough to sustain Ethan's grandchildren. Lena sat frozen, her lips slightly parted but her voice absent. Then Mr. Langford paused. "To Miss Lena Caldwell," he said, his tone softening ever so slightly, "your mother Evelyn has left you one item of personal significance. The painting titled Evening Echoes, currently displayed in the family study." Lena blinked. "A painting?" she echoed, barely above a whisper. Ethan chuckled audibly. "I suppose even Mom couldn't resist a little poetic cruelty," he said, shaking his head. Mr. Langford offered a tight, uncomfortable smile. "She specified it be collected within 7 days. Lena stood up slowly, her chair scraping back against the polished floor. She nodded once, wordlessly, and walked out, ignoring Ethan's snide offer to find a spot for her in PR if she was bored at the museum. As she exited into the chilled air of the city, clutching a painting she hadn't seen since she was a teenager, Lena felt more alone than ever. But somewhere deep beneath the humiliation, a flicker of suspicion began to glow. Lena placed the painting gently on the table in her loft apartment, its frame worn at the edges, the title Evening Echoes etched into a small brass plaque at the bottom. The artwork depicted a twilight forest, shadows stretching long across the mossy ground, with subtle geometric shapes woven into the tree trunks and brush. Details she had barely noticed before. She had always remembered it hanging in the study of the Caldwell mansion, but never paid much attention to it. Now, alone in her apartment overlooking the drizzle-slicked streets of Seattle, the painting seemed to demand her attention. That night, as the city lights flickered below, Lena couldn't sleep. She found herself drawn back to the painting over and over, studying the odd shapes embedded within the forest scene. Were they just artistic flourishes, or was there a pattern? The next morning, Marta Ruiz arrived unannounced, cradling a tin of fresh scones and eyes rimmed with fatigue. "I thought you might need company today," she said softly. Marta had worked for the Caldwell family for over 20 years, but she had always treated Lena with the warmth her own mother rarely offered. When she saw the painting laid out, her breath caught. "She loved this piece," Marta whispered, fingers trembling slightly as she touched the edge of the canvas. "In her last months, she'd sit for hours just staring at it, sometimes muttering about numbers and layers. We thought it was the illness talking." Lena's eyes widened. "Numbers?" Marta nodded. She kept saying there was something in the patterns, something important. Your father dismissed it as nonsense. But she seemed desperate, like she needed someone to see what she saw. That evening, as the rain tapped softly against her windows, Lena pulled out her old museum-grade tools, UV light, magnifying glass, and a digital scanner. Her years as a curator had taught her how to detect forgeries and hidden restorations. She never expected to use those skills on her own inheritance. Under ultraviolet light, faint impressions began to glow beneath the layers of paint. Shapes too regular, too intentional to be accidental. Some formed clusters, almost like symbols or coordinates. A chill ran down her spine. She sat back slowly, the painting pulsing in the dim light like it held a heartbeat of its own. Her mother hadn't left her nothing. She had left her a message, a puzzle, a challenge, and maybe, just maybe, a secret waiting to be uncovered, one that her father and brother never knew how to decipher. The deeper Lena dug into the painting, the more obsessed she became. Every evening after work, she returned to her apartment and resumed her analysis, cataloging the geometric shapes, comparing their positions, and running image overlays on her laptop. The symbols weren't random. Some of them repeated with subtle variations, others seemed to align along invisible axes, forming lattices reminiscent of old navigation charts. It was like a code hidden in plain sight. One night, while digitally adjusting the contrast on a scan, Lena saw it, a faint numerical sequence embedded in the bark of a painted tree, barely perceptible unless one knew exactly what to look for. Her pulse quickened. They were coordinates, longitude and latitude, a location tucked into brushstrokes. She jotted them down quickly, heart hammering. Why would her mother hide a set of coordinates in a painting no one was supposed to care about? The next night, as Lena continued mapping the code, a loud knock shattered her focus. She crept to the peephole and froze. Ethan stood outside her apartment door, suit rumpled, eyes bloodshot. "Lena," he called, voice too calm, "I just want to talk." She didn't move. "I know you took the painting. There's something I need to explain." Her silence only seemed to frustrate him. "Look, I'll pay you. $2 million. Just give it back." Her stomach twisted. Hours ago he'd laughed in her face about the painting's worth. Now he was offering millions. That confirmed it. He'd discovered there was more to Evening Echoes than sentimental brushwork. When she didn't answer, Ethan's voice turned sharp. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. That painting belongs to Caldwell Technologies now. It's company property." That was a lie, and a weak one. She could hear the panic behind his polished words. After several tense minutes, he left, but Lena stayed frozen for a long time, her hand clutching the frame. The painting had become something dangerous. Later, alone in the quiet of her loft, Lena ran her fingers along the back of the frame. Something felt off. An unnatural ridge beneath the canvas. She carefully removed the backing and discovered a folded envelope, aged and sealed with red wax. Inside was a handwritten letter, penned in her mother's precise cursive. "If you're reading this, Lena, you've seen what others missed. Now it's your turn to finish what I began. Follow the coordinates, find the truth, and whatever you do, don't trust your brother." Lena left Seattle before sunrise, the painting wrapped carefully in a waterproof case, the letter folded into the inner pocket of her coat. She'd memorized the coordinates, somewhere near the edge of the Olympic National Forest, miles from the nearest town. As the city skyline faded behind her and fog thickened along the highway, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. A black SUV had tailed her for several exits before peeling off, but the unease remained. She veered off the main road, taking winding backways until she reached a gravel path nearly swallowed by trees. The address on the deed, found in her mother's hidden files, matched a dilapidated farmhouse, surrounded by towering evergreens and moss-covered fences. At first glance it looked abandoned, but the painting, when held against the tree line, aligned perfectly with the scenery. The tree formations in the artwork matched the real ones. Her mother had hidden a map within the painting itself. Just behind the barn, half buried in ivy, Lena found what looked like an old storm cellar. 2 rusted metal doors with a heavy padlock. She tapped along the frame and discovered a concealed keypad embedded in the soil. She took a deep breath and entered the first sequence from the painting. A soft click echoed in the silence. The doors creaked open, revealing a narrow stairwell leading into darkness. She descended slowly, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. As she stepped into the underground corridor, motion sensor lights flickered on, revealing sterile white walls and sleek steel doors. The air smelled of ozone and old machinery. She had expected dust and decay, but instead, she'd entered a place still alive with energy. The lab was unlike anything she had ever seen. Dozens of workstations, computers, and storage lockers lined the space. On one wall were technical schematics, some familiar, many decades ahead of anything on the market. Her mother's name, Dr. Evelyn Rowe, was printed on every blueprint. Lena ran her fingers across the glass surface of a display console that booted up at her touch, requesting voice verification. She froze. Then instinctively she read the final line of her mother's letter aloud. "You always saw what others missed." The screen blinked green and unlocked. A library of files unfurled across the interface. Folders labeled Prototype Alpha, AI Core V1, Quantum Mapping, and beneath them all, a sealed directory marked Vox Veritas. In one corner of the lab, Lena found a cabinet filled with early patent drafts. Dozens of them, bearing striking resemblance to Caldwell Technologies' current product line. But here, the names had been stripped from the official record and replaced with Gregory Caldwell's. The betrayal struck her like a gut punch. Her mother hadn't just been the mind behind the company. She had been the architect of it all. Lena stood in the center of the lab, surrounded by truth, betrayal, and brilliance, and realized the painting had led her not just to a secret, but to a turning point. The next move she made would change everything. Lena sat at the primary terminal, Evelyn Rowe's name glowing in the corner of the screen, as if her mother were still there, guiding her hand. With cautious resolve, she opened the folder labeled Vox Veritas. Inside were layers of encrypted documents, schematics, patents, and correspondence, all meticulously dated, cataloged, and cross-referenced. As she read, a grim tapestry unfolded. Evelyn had developed breakthrough technologies years before Caldwell Technologies was ever founded, AI structures, data security frameworks, and prototype designs that would eventually become the company's flagship products. But rather than credit her, Gregory Caldwell, Lena's father, had rebranded her innovations under his name, filing patents under shell companies and strategically sidelining her influence. Lena's throat tightened as she scrolled through email exchanges between Evelyn and lawyers. Pleas for protection, desperate warnings about her ideas being stolen. She'd tried to fight back once, but Gregory, with Ethan already positioned as heir apparent, had crushed her resistance through manipulation and threats. And now, after Evelyn's death, they'd assumed the trail had gone cold forever. But Evelyn had outmaneuvered them. The painting hadn't been an act of sentimentality. It was a cipher, a trail of breadcrumbs leading Lena here, to a vault of truth preserved beneath the forest. At the heart of Vox Veritas was a protocol, an executable program designed to compile and distribute all the evidence of intellectual theft, patent fraud, and illegal acquisitions to major news outlets, global patent authorities, and government agencies in a single burst transmission. It was her mother's final move, the one she hadn't lived to see, but had entrusted to the only person she believed could finish it, her daughter. Tears welled in Lena's eyes, not just from the magnitude of the betrayal, but from the depth of faith Evelyn had placed in her. All her life, Lena had felt like the outsider in her own family, dismissed for pursuing history and preservation instead of power and profit. But now she understood it hadn't been a failure. It had been preparation. Before she could process more, the sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Lena's blood ran cold. She turned toward the entrance just as two figures stepped into the fluorescent light. Gregory Caldwell, her supposedly dead father, and Ethan. Lena backed away instinctively, clutching the tablet close to her chest. Gregory looked unchanged, his sharp jaw and silver hair identical to his last public photos. Ethan stood just behind him, hands in his coat pockets, eyes narrowed. "Impressive, isn't it?" Gregory said smoothly, his voice like ice. "Did you really think your mother could keep this from me forever?" Ethan added with a sneer. "We needed someone to unlock it, and Mom made sure only you could." Lena's mind raced. They had used her, the will, the painting. It had all been a trap to lead them here, but they'd made one mistake. They'd underestimated Evelyn Rowe. And the daughter she raised. Lena's pulse roared in her ears as Gregory and Ethan stepped fully into the lab, their silhouettes cutting sharply against the sterile white glow. Gregory scanned the room with a predator's calm, his expression unreadable, while Ethan's smirk twisted into something darker. "You were always your mother's little project," he said, circling the workstation like he owned it. "Too sentimental, too curious. Just enough brains to be useful." Lena stood her ground, her fingers subtly drifting toward the terminal behind her. "She built all this," she replied, voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Everything this company is, everything you both claimed credit for, was hers." Gregory raised an eyebrow. "And now it will be yours too, if you make the right choice." He motioned toward the screen. "Raise the files, destroy the protocol. We'll give you control of the museum division, fund your research, even give you public credit. All you have to do is let this place stay buried." Lena almost laughed. The same people who had erased her mother from history were now offering her a bribe to help finish the job. "You're not here to protect a legacy," she said. "You're here to protect yourselves." Ethan stepped forward, dropping the charm completely. "Let me be clear. If you don't do it, we will. One way or another, this lab doesn't leave standing." Behind her, the terminal hummed, still unlocked, still ready. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "If you're reading this, it means you see what others miss. That's your power, Lena. Use it." With a breathless decision, Lena reached down and entered the final passcode into the system. The lab lights dimmed abruptly, replaced by a red hue that pulsed like a heartbeat. A synthetic voice filled the room. "Clarity protocol activated. Broadcasting in progress. Files are being transmitted to verified authorities and media outlets. Deletion. Impossible." Gregory lunged for the console, slamming his fist against the screen. "What did you do?" he bellowed. Ethan spun around, panic creeping into his eyes as alarm klaxons rang from hidden speakers. "You insane little... Do you even realize what you've done?" Lena stepped back, her body trembling but her eyes locked on theirs. "I ended the lie," she said. "The world's going to know the truth." Heavy doors slammed shut with hydraulic force, sealing the lab. From a narrow window in the stairwell above, Lena could already see the flashing lights of approaching police vehicles, summoned by the lab's emergency protocols. Gregory turned toward her one last time, his calm mask shattering into fury. "You've ruined everything." But Lena shook her head, breath catching in her throat. "No," she said quietly, "I've just restored what you stole." As the authorities closed in, and the empire they'd built on deception began to crumble, Lena felt the weight of years lift from her shoulders. Her mother hadn't died in vain. And the truth was no longer hidden. It was alive, unstoppable, and finally free. The days that followed were a whirlwind. News outlets across the country exploded with headlines. Caldwell Technologies built on stolen inventions. Founder Gregory Caldwell found alive, arrested in fraud scandal, and whistleblower daughter exposes billion-dollar corporate theft. Lena watched it unfold from a quiet corner of Marta Ruiz's home. The woman who had become more like family than her own blood ever had. The files Evelyn had hidden within the lab not only proved decades of intellectual property theft, but included dozens of unfiled, groundbreaking inventions that had never seen the light of day, technology that had the power to transform the industry. As Lena sifted through the rest of her mother's data, Naomi Voss from the U.S. Patent Office arrived with a team of analysts. Calm and sharply intelligent, Naomi placed a thick stack of papers on the kitchen table. "Your mother registered most of these under a private innovation trust," she explained. "And that trust names you, Miss Caldwell, as the sole legal beneficiary." Lena sat in stunned silence, flipping through patent after patent, each one now hers, each one once stolen, now reclaimed. "What does that mean for the company?" she asked slowly. Naomi gave a small, knowing smile. "It means Caldwell Technologies cannot legally manufacture, distribute, or sell anything based on these systems without your approval. They're entirely dependent on your mother's work. And now, on you." The realization hit hard. The power that had once been used to silence Evelyn Rowe was now Lena's to wield. But she didn't intend to use it the same way. She didn't want revenge. She wanted reform. Within a week, Lena stood before the exhausted board of Caldwell Technologies. The executives, shaken by arrests and shareholder outrage, had little room to negotiate. They accepted her conditions without resistance: full leadership transition, renaming the company, and immediate funding for a foundation supporting inventors whose ideas had been suppressed or stolen. As she walked through the marble lobby of the company that once ignored her, a sense of poetic justice settled in her chest. The building felt different now, less like a fortress of lies, more like a blank slate. The painting Evening Echoes had been hung in her new office, directly above the executive desk, but it wasn't just decoration. It was a reminder that innovation born from integrity was more powerful than any lie. Her mother had left her the tools. Now, Lena would build something that would last. Not on stolen genius, but on truth, transparency, and a vision of what the future could be. The boardroom was silent as Lena Caldwell entered. Every eye fixed on her. Some wary, some skeptical. Others quietly relieved. The once intimidating chamber at the top of Caldwell Technologies' tower now felt like the final battlefield. She wore no armor beyond a tailored black blazer, and the letter from her mother tucked into her inner pocket. Naomi Voss stood beside her, placing thick legal documents on the polished table. Caldwell now holds sole ownership of the core patents this company is built upon," Naomi stated, her voice calm but resolute. "Without her consent, your products are no longer legally viable." A stunned murmur ran through the room. Lena didn't flinch. She took her seat at the head of the table, her father's former seat, and looked each board member in the eye. "I'm not here to destroy what's left," she said. "I'm here to rebuild it into something worthy of the people it exploited. Starting today, Caldwell Technologies will become a company rooted in transparency, ethics, and actual innovation." There were protests at first, questions about stockholders, losses, public image, but Lena came prepared. She presented a transition plan that included a rebrand, a public apology, and a compensation program for inventors whose ideas had been stolen. "We can't change the past," she said firmly, "but we can decide what kind of future we want to create." Faced with lawsuits, regulatory pressure, and a public outcry for accountability, the board had no choice but to vote in her favor. With a unanimous motion, Lena was officially appointed CEO. Later that afternoon, she stepped into what had once been Gregory Caldwell's private office. The space was sterile and cold, a monument to ego. She walked to the wall safe behind the false panel where her father once hung his awards. Using the final sequence of numbers hidden in Evening Echoes, she cracked the safe and retrieved a leather-bound journal, her mother's. Inside were handwritten notes and names, inventors, engineers, and collaborators her father had cheated, silenced, or erased. Lena traced her fingers over the ink. These weren't just victims. They were her mother's peers, and now they would be remembered. The room around her was still, but Lena could almost hear Evelyn's voice. "You were never meant to follow. You were born to lead. 1 year later, the company once known as Caldwell Technologies had undergone a transformation as radical as it was redemptive. Now called Roe Futures, it stood not only as a tech leader but as a beacon of ethical innovation. Lena had kept her promise. The first act under her leadership was the establishment of the Evelyn Roe Foundation, a program dedicated to identifying and compensating inventors whose work had been co-opted or erased under the previous regime. Dozens of creators came forward, some with tears, others with quiet gratitude, as they were finally acknowledged and rewarded for their contributions. But Lena didn't stop there. She launched a public innovation incubator, a space where young minds could develop ideas without fear of theft or suppression, and where creativity was protected, not exploited. Each month, she personally reviewed submissions, remembering the names in her mother's journal, determined never to let history repeat itself. The annual Roe Visionary Award was established in her mother's name, and at the first ceremony, Lena stood on a brightly lit stage, handing a crystal trophy to a young engineer whose solar filtration device had the potential to change lives. As cameras flashed and applause echoed, Lena spotted evening echoes hanging in the background. Its geometric shapes now symbols of hope instead of secrets. She felt Evelyn's presence in that moment, as if her mother's brilliance was still guiding everything. Lena no longer felt like an outsider. She had not only claimed her inheritance, she had redefined it. The empire, built on deception, had become a platform for justice, transparency, and inspiration. Evelyn's legacy was no longer buried in the shadows of stolen patents. It was alive in the light of every new idea Roe Futures helped bring to life. Some nights, long after the office had emptied and the city below settled into quiet, Lena would sit alone beneath the soft glow of evening echoes, the painting that had changed everything. Its once mysterious geometric shapes now felt familiar, like an old language she'd finally learned to read. They no longer whispered secrets. They offered reassurance. Across from her desk stood a new portrait, not of Gregory Caldwell, but of Evelyn Roe, captured mid-laugh, vibrant and alive. Lena had placed it there on the day the company officially reopened as Roe Futures. It was a daily reminder of the brilliance that had been hidden for too long, and the love that had been quietly encoded into every brushstroke of that so-called worthless painting. A few days ago, Lena received a letter from Ethan, now serving time for fraud and conspiracy. It was equal parts apology and request, for reconciliation, for redemption. She hadn't answered. Some patterns she had learned are best left untouched. Instead, she turned her focus toward the next innovation fair, preparing to mentor a group of young inventors whose ideas pulsed with the same quiet determination she had once seen in her mother's sketches. Lena finally understood the real inheritance Evelyn had left behind. Not just patents or a lab or even justice, but the belief that truth must be protected, and brilliance, no matter where it comes from, deserves to shine. Evening Echoes had not simply led her to the truth, it had transformed her. And now, as Lena built a future rooted in integrity, collaboration, and courage, she knew without a doubt that her mother would be proud, not of the company, but of the woman she had become. Because the greatest legacies are not carved in stone, but carried forward in the choices we make. The story of Lena Caldwell teaches us that true legacy isn't measured by wealth, status, or power. It's defined by integrity, courage, and the choices we make when faced with injustice. Though overlooked and undervalued by her family, Lena's journey reveals the strength that lies in quiet persistence and the ability to see what others dismiss. Her mother's hidden brilliance, long buried beneath corporate theft and deception, serves as a powerful reminder that truth can be concealed, but not destroyed. Through Lena's determination to uncover the past and rebuild a better future, we learn that even the most deeply rooted corruption can be challenged and changed when we stand for what's right. This story also underscores the importance of believing in oneself, even when others don't. Lena's background in art, once mocked by her family, became the key to unraveling a powerful mystery and reclaiming stolen innovation. It reminds us that no skill or path is ever truly wasted. Ultimately, Evening Echoes is more than a painting. It's a symbol of legacy reclaimed, voices restored, and the power of truth to outlast even the strongest of lies. The lesson is simple. In a world of deception, authenticity and vision will always find a way to rise.